my name is James Andriella, and you are listening to the sixth episode of the Back to Human podcast. On today's show, we have special guest Dr. Thomas Seagar. Dr. Seagar is an associate professor in the School of Sustainable Engineering and the Built Environment at Arizona State University. His teaching and research is focused on a new approach to personal development called self-actual engineering, which is about redesigning ourselves, our relationships, and our lives to realize more of our fullest potential. Dr. Seagar is also the CEO of Morozko Forge, which is a company that builds ice baths that can maintain freezing temperatures, and it also has its own filtration system and ozone as a disinfectant, so you can enjoy doing cold plunges as much as you want without having to go to the gas station to buy loads of ice every day. I'm very excited to have him on the show today to talk about the benefits of cold exposure, and without further ado, Tom Seagar. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thank you, James. That's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much, man. So, wanted to know how you got your first introduction into cold thermogenesis. Like, what got you started? How long ago did you start, and what inspired that?
Let's go back maybe 6 years. What inspired it was a lot of dissatisfaction with my life. My children were growing. By this time, my daughter was maybe 16. She was graduating from high school early. And that's an inflection point in every marriage. And the way my marriage inflected was to dissolve. So my wife went one way, I went another way. Now I got to go back out on the dating market. I got to figure all that out. I'm almost 50. And I'm going to read everything I can get my hands on. Thank goodness for the internet, and thank goodness for digital publishing. So I'm pouring through every book that anybody recommends to me, and I get to Mike Cernovich's Guerrilla Mindset. This is before Cernovich became like a famous political journalist. He published this book, which is autobiographical. And in there, practically the only thing I remember is that he says, you should take cold showers. You should take cold showers because they suck and you're going to hate it. And you should do more things that you hate. And I'm in this really experimental mind. I'd lost a lot of weight. I was almost 250, like between 245 and 250. I got myself down in the mid 190s. And I did this because I read Anti-Fragile by Taleb. He says, fasting is good for you. I already knew a lot about the Atkins diet, and I knew a lot about glucose because my son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when he was 6 years old. I already knew that everything the dietitians and nutritionists were trying to tell us was bullcrap because I was measuring his blood glucose, and it was really difficult to get good advice, nutritional advice, out of traditional medicine. So I've been prepared by almost 20 years, not quite, but 15 years of working with my son's diabetes to be suspicious of everything the medical establishment was telling me, to run my own experiments, find out what works for me. And here's Cernovich saying, I got to take cold showers. So thank goodness that I live in Phoenix, because the tap water is like, in the wintertime, 60 degrees or something, like not even cold by the standards that I would measure now. So I go into my shower and I hate it. Like he's right. It's 60 and I'm still like, screw you, Mike Cernovich, and I don't know how to do this. I haven't watched any of Ben Greenfield's videos or anything, but I keep it up because he was right. I hated it. And I should probably do things that I'm uncomfortable with. I think Eleanor Roosevelt has that quote, do something every day that scares you. And this is the thing that scared me. Then Wim Hof started becoming like a big thing. There's a Burning Man troupe here in Phoenix. This is all pre-COVID. And so, they're into yoga and art cars and things like that. And they stumbled across Wim Hof. Scott Carney's book came out, What Doesn't Kill Us. And, it's all about the amazing Wim Hof. So some of the people that I knew, including Jason, who's a graduate of Arizona State University. He was in my class. And he's part of this Burning Man troupe. And he's like, hey, Tom, you should do this Wim Hof stuff with me. Well, now Jason is the CEO of Morozko Forge. I've stepped back into this chief science officer role, and Jason is taking over the company. And he really got me like deeper into this. We buy, like, just like you say, we go down to the Quickie Mart, we get 200 pounds of ice, we put it in a tub, we do all the hyperventilation, and we get in there. And I'm like, no, this is it. Totally different experience than the cold shower. The cold shower made me angry, and the ice bath made me exhilarated. And like there was joy inside me coming out of the ice bath, which is a much better feeling than anger. It's years later, because it's just like 6 months ago, I found this journal article, and you're not going to believe it. It's in some obscure journal, like, the Journal of Circumpolar Scandinavian Health or something that you would never think. And there's this guy in Finland who did this study, whole body cold immersion versus partial body. Partial body will speed up your heart rate. Whole body will slow it down. And I'm like, that's it. When I was getting into my shower, you can never get your whole, it's only one half of your body that is cold, and it's speeding up my heart rate and it's giving me the adrenaline, but I can't calm down like that. I'm not getting the meditative state like that. And I'm not getting the joy and the feeling of exhilaration. But when I went whole body, I was hooked. And you got to imagine, James, that the water in the summer in Phoenix is like 90 degrees. I couldn't even do my tepid showers anymore. But that's okay. Jason's got a backyard, and we get ourselves a stock tank, and we're buying ice. It takes a hell of a lot of ice to get that 90-degree water down to like 40 and keep it there for long enough to have like a cold plunge party in your backyard at 115 degrees in Phoenix. So we got frustrated. We're like, this isn't working. We want to keep doing it. But heck, we're engineers. I know my thermodynamics. I ought to be able to make this work. So I took an old dorm fridge and I dropped it off at Jason's house. I didn't give him any instructions or any ideas or anything like that. And my girlfriend was like, well, aren't you going to tell him what that's for? I'm like, nope, I don't need to. Sure enough, he called me the next day and he's like, do you have another one of those? Wait, make it two. I just broke that one. He's taking it all apart and trying to figure out how it works. And a month later, we're making ice. We're making ice in a stock tank. We built our own refrigeration unit. And we're like, I think if we insulate this right and we put a box around it, and is the ugliest monstrosity. I have pictures, but I'm not going to show them. They say if you're not embarrassed by your first prototype, you're not trying hard enough, And this was the most awful thing. But we had a party and we had a bunch of people over, and one of the guys is like, I want to buy it. And so, Jason and I were looking at each other thinking we just wanted to make our lives easier so we didn't have to go get 200 pounds of ice every week. Now I've spent $20,000 on copper and wire and tanks and insulation and stuff like this. What will we even sell this for? And it was an embarrassingly small, we had no idea that there was no such thing as an ice bath market, or we would have bought it off of somebody else, I guess, if there was, but we had no idea that there were other people out there who wanted the same thing that we wanted. So we put some pictures up on Etsy. We sold it to one of our friends. And sure enough, a guy in San Francisco who's a friend of Ben Greenfield's called us up. And he says, I've been looking for years for something like I think you got. I saw your pictures on Etsy. We're not even on Etsy anymore, James. Like it was an embarrassment. But he says, will you make me one? And Jason and I looked at each other and said, I think we need a website. I think we need to put this out there. Jason took a forge to Burning Man. Again, this is all pre-COVID. He brought ice to the playa, and it was a sensation because to get an ice bath, in the desert, to incorporate that into the whole experience of Burning Man was something nobody expected and everybody appreciated. We got that call from Ben Greenfield, and he says, so I heard you got a interesting thing going on. I'm kind of into cold exposure. James, I had no idea who Ben Greenfield was. I'm like, yeah, what's it to you? I'm not saying I was a jerk, but I didn't know how affiliate marketing works. I didn't know how search engine optimization works. I didn't know who Ben Greenfield was, but we talked it over, and he came recommended from our customer in San Francisco. We said, okay, he seems like a nice guy. Let's get him a forge. Unbeknownst to us, Ben was writing his book, Boundless, and he was almost at the stage where he had proofs. And he didn't even see the forge, but he talked to his friend, our customer. He'd heard from some people who are at Burning Man. He wrote us into the book. And he was like, by the way, there's this company called Morozko Forge. They use ozone filtration. They make ice. It sounds pretty cool. Maybe you want to check them out. The book came out after we sent him a forge. And I was so flattered and grateful to Ben. I'm like, got to call him up, got to email him, got to find out how's his forge. Well, he froze it solid. Like he hadn't even been in it. Like he set it up, and it's cold in Spokane in the wintertime. He had it outdoors, which is not something that we've experienced. We're in Phoenix. We didn't know. It took like 2 days for that thing to freeze like 18 straight inches of ice. He's like, Tom, I haven't even been in it. I had to wait till May for his forge to thaw out, for him, or maybe it was April, but you get my point. And then he starts going in, and I love it. Ben said, I had Brian Hoyer come out. I wanted to check the grounding, because he's very EMF conscious, and grounding therapy, well, that's a thing. It reduces the viscosity of your blood. It breaks up coagulation. It helps prevent heart disease. It improves your mental clarity. And we grounded the forge on purpose. And we're thinking safety. We want it's an electrical appliance. It's got a metal tub, but we didn't just ground the tub. We ground the water. We grounded everything. And when Brian Hoyer got up to Ben Greenfield, Ben was like, I love this. I'm getting my grounding therapy. I'm getting my cold therapy. You guys have done something fantastic. He started posting. The next thing you know, we have a company. I'm not saying we're making any money, James. Like, I might be the worst businessman who ever, got this far founding a company. But we're filling a need that a lot of people have. Since us, you can Google cold bath, whatever, and you're going to find at least a half a dozen competitors. And sometimes I worry about it. Like, they're all selling more equipment than we are. We're still the only ones who make ice. And then, I'll have an interview like this and people say, well, why do you need ice? I'll be like, you don't need ice. You can do 50 degrees. I started at 60. It scared the hell out of me. You don't need ice, but I do. I need ice, because when I stare down at my forge, if I don't see ice in there, I'm like, there's nothing to be scared of. I don't get that anxiety. I don't get that nervous system activation. I did 50 degrees at a friend's house the other day. He has Parkinson's, and to him, the shivering is very scary. He wants the dopamine, because if you know anything about Parkinson's, it's a dopamine disorder. He gets this big dopamine hit. It lasts for hours, and he feels so much better. But his Parkinson's comes with a tremble. And if he gets too cold and he begins to shiver, it's all the more frightening, because he's like, is this Parkinson's or is this just thermogenesis? So he keeps it at 50. I'm like, okay, great. I'll get in. I'm here with you. I'm here to support you. I could do 50 degrees all day now. To try and make it more challenging, I did this thing, which, by the way, you should not do, but I'm going to do a breath hold. And I'm going to do a face down breath hold, because it's only 50 degrees. I set a new record, 22 seconds. Yay. He goes, you should do that with a snorkel. And that way you can breathe. So I did. I used to snorkel around all the time when I was a kid. Indefinitely. Like, 50 degrees is no longer a metabolic challenge for me, but it is for him. I need ice, because if I don't see the ice and have the experience of the ice, I'm not getting the psychological activation that I'm looking for. I'm still getting the brown fat, and that's wonderful. I can still use it for exercise recovery, even though I never do. I'm always cold exposure before the exercise. But for psychological reasons, for reasons of psychological resilience, I want that ice. It turns out I'm not the only one.
You say don't do a breath hold, and I'm thinking don't go on my Instagram, because I literally have one where I'm in the forge and I'm holding my breath. Probably, I think I beat your record, but
I wouldn't be surprised. I suck at that breath hold. It scares the shit out of me. And but I mean, that's partly why I do it. But yes, I'm saying don't do a breath hold, and here's why. There's something called autonomic conflict. I did not make this term up. There's a researcher in the United Kingdom. His last name is Tipton, and he's published, I've never talked to him, but he's published a few studies. If the videos on Instagram or YouTube are to be believed, Tipton has a cold lab. He's got a cold tank. He has these controlled conditions in which he immerses people. It's not an ice bath, it's a cold bath. And he does this in a much more scientific way than I do so that he can publish these articles. And he may have coined, or at least he published about this phrase, autonomic conflict. And by the way, Wikipedia loves it. They love citing Tipton, and they love trying to tell you that you're going to die in your ice bath, which you are not. But I can't convince, there's some English major on the other side of Wikipedia that keeps canceling my edits and telling me I don't know what I'm talking about. So I've given up on Wikipedia. Still, Tipton says the autonomic conflict works like this. When you get into the forge or to the cold water and you go in feet first, just like our ancestral, ape or the early human beings must have waded into the river to catch fish, you experience something called the gasp reflex. And you, like when I go into the forge, it still happens to me. It will cause you'll feel the urge to hyperventilate. And I get it. Like you're activated. Every cell in your body is telling you, get us out of here. James, you're going to die. It's too cold, And so it creates that fight or flight response, which is something I want. I want to put myself under that hormetic stress. So that's the gasp reflex. It would create it would prepare your body for action, for the hunt, for the fight, increased heart rate, increased respiration, adrenaline if you need it, so you can meet the fight or flight threat. But if you go in face first, it activates something different called the dive reflex. Remember that humans are aquatic. They don't just wade through with their spears looking for, something to catch. There are human beings, it's called free diving, and it's very dangerous, but there are human beings who are adapted to diving down, no scuba equipment, and catching mollusks or fishing or whatever it is they do underwater. Humans are meant to dive. And when we dive, it's the opposite of gasp. Our heart rate goes down to conserve metabolism. We're expecting to be cut off from oxygen, from respiration, for however long it takes to go get that conch or that whatever it is, we're going to go get that lobster and come back up. And to do that, we have to slow our respiration down to zero. We have to slow our metabolism down so we don't produce too much carbon dioxide into our veins. You can see this. Justin Hoagland just posted a video on his Instagram, No Joke 44. And he's got his heart rate monitor on. He's in his forge. He just got off his treadmill. He pops into his forge. He's about 120. He relaxes down to about 108. And then when he does a breath hold, he goes down to 79 beats per minute. And he stays there. Now, Justin is a former Navy SEAL. He's doing cold exposure because he was medically discharged from the military when he developed multiple sclerosis. There's something like 17 FDA-approved drugs for multiple sclerosis. None of them work as well for managing the symptoms of MS as cold exposure does. So we got 2 customers that are just doing it for MS. Justin's one of them. But it also, when he does his underwater breath hold, it reminds him that he's alive, that there's still some Superman in him. I mean, he's done his Navy frickin' SEAL training, which is all underwater bomb demolition, like it's all about the cold exposure and the swimming and the controlled breathing. And his heart rate will go down. So autonomic conflict is there's one aspect of your body, the gasp reflex saying, crank it up. There's another aspect of your body, the dive reflex that says, take it down. And Tipton hypothesizes that if you go face first, you may create 2 problematic situations. One is if you go face first and experience gasp, you're going to suck in water and you could drown. Okay, that's one. And there are cases of people drowning in cold water. I don't know why. I don't know if it was what Tipton is worried about or if it was something else. But a misplaced dive reflex could lead to taking water into your lungs. The other, he says, is if you're experiencing the gasp reflex and you fail to breathe, If you hold your breath, either through anxiety or for some other reason, you could create this. One thing is saying, take your heart up. The other is saying, take your heart down. And in that conflict, Tipton hypothesizes, as far as I know, it's never been documented, but you could experience a heart irregularity that for some people could be very dangerous. So Tipton's done this work on the dangers of ice baths. I've published all of this in a summary format with our recommendations about how to stay safe in your forge. There are 4 of them. Forge sober, like it's a bath. And I don't want you to go Jim Morrison on us or something, like people die in bathtubs because they drown or because they're drunk or because they're high or whatever. I want you to forge sober. And that's got nothing to do with the cold. It's got everything to do with, I don't want you to drown. Second one is supervised kids. Cold exposure is great for kids. They got a lot more brown fat than you and I, and it's fine. And kids should not be swimming unsupervised. So those are the first 2. Then you go feet first. Never go face first. Just because you saw Mike Mutzel being a clown on Instagram doesn't mean he's recommending that. You go feet first, because then you will get the gasp reflex and give yourself time to get control of your breathing and calm yourself down. I love submerging and I love doing a breath hold. The face down is different than the face up. I'm nowhere near as anxious when I'm face up because I know it's right there, but face down does something different psychologically. That's the dive. And the 4th one, breathe. Breathe is not just like a mental note. It's not just part of a good practice. It is a safety tip. It is good for your heart. It is good for your body. It is how you should be experiencing the cold to keep yourself out of the danger zone. So all of that is on our website, or you can Google, ice bath dangers, ice bath safety, and our article will come up. Google doesn't like us very much, but on that topic, our article will come up, and I'm glad I get to share it. Someday I'll meet Tipton, and I'll say, about this autonomic conflict. Have you ever experienced that in the lab? Have you ever seen it? Have you ever, what should we watch out for? So next time I'm over in the UK, I'll send him a note and I'll say, hey, scientist to scientist, can I buy you a beer? We'll see if he's up for it.
So that's only if you're going face first that you have to worry about it.
I never go face first. I don't go fast. No, if I'm, Coronado Island where the SEALs train, of course I'm diving into the Pacific Ocean face first. It's only 60 degrees, right? Of course I'm body surfing and I'm doing everything for me that is fun. What I'm really talking about is how cold acclimated are you? Don't go into a temperature that is going to give you that stress response face first. Now, for me, 60 is pleasant, and I'm going to body surf all day. But if you're just starting out, or if you're going to be cautious, you go feet first every time. When you're ready to challenge yourself and you say, well, I'm going to go in all the way, you blow some bubbles. You don't have to hold your breath just because you're doing an underwater dunk. Blow bubbles, just like my mother taught me, when I was 3 years old, and she brought me to the beach to teach me how to swim. She started out blowing bubbles, same way that my kids learned in the pool. You don't have to hold your breath. For you, James, for Justin, for Mike Mutzel, for me, when I'm screwing around, I can understand why people who really want to push their edge want to do a breath hold under the water. And I'm still saying, go in feet first. You'll get there. Calm yourself down, give it a minute, then do your breath hold thing, because you're at that advanced level. And Scott Carney hates it when I say this. He's like, don't be going on the internet and telling people how to do that stuff. So now I go, I don't want to make Scott mad at me. I go on the internet and I tell people, don't do underwater breath hold.
Well, just make sure he doesn't hear this one.
Right. I'm not sure he's following that closely.
I got intrigued by the breath hold just because I was reading about the Buteyko method, and I was actually reading how I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No, but tell me.
So supposedly, depending on how long you can hold your breath, no disease can exist. So if you reach like a certain point, I believe it's like a 45-second, they call it controlled pause, then you're like as healthy as could be. But like if you're at 60, like you're damn near invincible. And then people that are sicker, they can't hold their breath as long, so they'll be at like a 5 or 7. People that are in the hospital, they're hyperventilating.
Yeah.
So I wanted to see how long that I could hold my breath, and one of the criteria for increasing your controlled pause was obviously there's diet, there's things like environmental, your carpet, you should be sleeping on a hard surface, and then the major one was cold exposure. You should be exposing yourself to cold every single day. So I was just
Wow.
like, let me just put two and two together and maybe I'll get there faster. So that's why I
Okay,
started.
so how are you doing? Like, what are your
Uh,
times like?
I could probably get up to under the water, like I think it was around like 50 seconds. It
That
might have been
seems
a
really
minute.
good.
Yeah, it's more
Okay.
of a mental thing for me.
I think it's once you reach a certain level of cardiovascular and metabolic health, I think it's mental because there's a panic response. It's the CO2 buildup in your veins. It sends a signal to your brain that says you're suffocating, you're going to die. You need to exhale. And I can extend my time without breathing or without inhaling if I exhale, which is kind of part of what Vim has toyed around with. But I'm going to push back for a second on the breath hold means you're practically invincible. And Justin is the case study because it's mental again. You got to imagine Justin goes to Iraq and he's a Navy SEAL, which means he's at the leading edge. And he was riding in an, oh God, it was an open vehicle. I can't remember what vehicle it was, but sure enough, improvised explosive device explosion goes through not the back of the vehicle, but the concussion wave went through the back of the vehicle. The thing about or I guess it's called a percussion wave. The thing about the percussion wave when it hits the brain is it progresses from one side of the brain to the other. Unlike a concussion in football or boxing or something where you have a blow that's localized, the percussion wave from a blast will go through the entire brain, rip it apart. It is possible to be able to hold your breath for 2 minutes and 20 seconds. I have seen Justin do it and still not be healthy because you have traumatic brain injury. Now, the brain is the metabolically most demanding organ in the body. But when the structure of his brain was torn apart by these blast waves, you can imagine the discordance between, like, he's in great shape, but he was in a wheelchair like 9 months later with symptoms, with this diagnosis, the symptomology of MS, because his brain was no longer able to get his body to do what his brain, what he wanted to do. This was a demoralizing, talk about mental health, way to go for Justin because he was such a high level athlete and he discovered cold exposure. And now, he's on the treadmill. Now he's doing the obstacle courses. He's still got MS. And when you see him run, you're like, there's something a little funky about him because he had to undergo physical therapy to relearn how to use his body. It is the cold exposure that got him to the point where he could exercise again, where he could manage the symptoms of MS. And unfortunately, the MS and the brain injury coexisted. So it wasn't just one thing that he was having to deal with. So why am I bringing all this up? Because first of all, I want to go hold my breath, like, see, where am I? I guess I'm not competitive or anything, but now I want to know how long can I go? But the second thing is I've been really into the brain injury, trauma, what's going on up in here. And I think it's like the most important healing mechanism that we have is emanating from our thoughts and our imagination. Maybe it's because I've been reading too much Joe Dispenza. Maybe I've been reading too much Bruce Lipton, but I don't think so. I think those are pretty clever guys. And when they tell me that the cells of your body have no choice but to respond to their environment, and one of the most important things about the environment are the electrical impulses that they're getting from your nervous system, I'm like, okay, I want to play around with that. So you say, yes, breath, and I'm with you. And then you're saying, also, it's mental. And I'm like, now you're talking.
The breath hold, but I'll send you the book. I'll text you the name.
Yeah, I'd like that.
I was reading into. I think you'll really enjoy that one. But for the controlled pause, you don't need to be in the cold tub to do that. It's more like when you first wake up, that's when you would measure. That's more of a better indicator of where you're actually at than just trying to be like ego-driven, trying to hold your breath and deprive yourself of oxygen in the cold plunge.
All right, I'm going to give it a shot. Then tomorrow morning, I'll wake up. I got my wristwatch by my bedside table. I'll say, okay, Tom, this is it.
We'll see. You might surprise yourself. It might be pretty long. Especially
Okay.
since you've been doing the cold exposure for a long time.
I'm going to try not to judge.
No one's here to judge.
There you go.
But it's the cold exposure is really a mental thing for me at this point. I think I started like 3 years ago, and I went to a Wim Hof just train. It wasn't, I didn't see him specifically, but they were doing a training there, and I think a lot of the magic actually happens in the breath holds. I know you're hyperventilating prior, and I believe why they did that was just before you get in, you're going to experience that hyperventilation. You're going to get that gasp, and if you can control your breathing, you're going to be fine. So
You got it.
focusing on exhaling a little bit longer and telling yourself that you're cool, you're good. But what's funny is, like you said, if I take a cold shower, I still hate it.
Me too.
It's not the same as the cold tub, because if I go in the forge, there'll be days where I look at it, I'll pass by it, I'm like, ugh, I grit my teeth, I'm like, I don't want to get in, but it's like, I know I need to do this, and it's going to be uncomfortable. It's not something that I want to do this very moment, but it's like the way that you do one thing is the way that you do everything. So if you're going to, like, I'm going to say it, bitch out just for something that's like 2 to potentially 4 minutes of uncomfortableness, like, what does that really say about other areas of your life? So it's a huge mental challenge for me. But despite the, I guess, mental fortitude that comes from it, what other benefits have you seen from cold exposure, cold thermogenesis?
Well, I've mentioned this briefly. We're going to come back to it. My testosterone went through the roof. And I wasn't even looking for testosterone. I didn't know anything about testosterone. I had this prostate scare, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to use keto. I'm going to use cold exposure, and then I'm going to go back and get my PSA checked. But in Arizona, you're allowed to order your own labs, at least for a lot of things. And so I wasn't going through a doctor because I was scared to. But, the doctor is going to say, I'm not going to let you out of this office until we do a prostate exam, And I didn't want to start that cascade of allopathic medicine that is sometimes its own train. And the next thing, you have to have 5 more tests so they can overdiagnose you for 6 other things. So I'm like, I'm going to get my own blood tests. I'm doing my keto. I'm doing my forge. How do I look? Well, I just checked all the freaking boxes. They're like, men's health. I'm like, I want that. I'm a man. I'm going to be healthy. So whatever they charge me, they draw out 4 vials of blood and I get a report back. And I'm looking for that PSA. And sure enough, it's going down. So I'm like, great. I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to head back again 3 more months. And sure enough, it's going down. I'd driven it all the way down to 0.8, which is below what they say the normal range is for a man in his 50s. But the report came back and it had a big red exclamation mark on it next to testosterone. Mm-hmm. And the red exclamation mark is out of range. Mine was 1180 and the top of their range was 1140. So I had to go look that up and say, well, what's going on? Turns out I got like the testosterone now of an oversexed 19-year-old. And confidence in my PSA. So I'm going to go see a urologist. And this guy's about my age. And I bring my report. And I'm like, so that, this is what I've been doing. And, this is where I'm important. I think I'm good now, right? He goes, I don't see any problem. But what's this? I go, well, those my testosterone levels. And I think they're great, right? And he goes, let me just check one more thing. I don't know that, because I'm kind of reading his mind a little bit. There's a bodybuilding culture in Scottsdale. This guy's in Scottsdale. A lot of guys are taking supplementary exogenous testosterone. He wanted to know. This is a test I cannot order myself. Luteinizing hormone. Am I juicing or am I producing? So he goes, just go back. They're going to draw a little bit more blood. We're going to get this one more thing checked out. Luteinizing hormone comes back through the roof. Big red exclamation mark. Because luteinizing hormone is a metabolic precursor. If luteinizing hormone is low and testosterone is high, my urologist would have said, Tom, what's going on? What are you taking? But because both are high, he's like, aren't you blessed? Mm-hmm. Well, now I have to really figure this out. Like, I'm going to the library and I'm looking for any evidence. And sure enough, there's this study in Japan. I just pulled it up so I could tell you what it was all about. They called it effects of physical exercise and cold stimulation on serum testosterone in men. They took a bunch of college-age men and they did two things. First was some cold exposure. First was exercise bike, then cold exposure for recovery, measure testosterone before and after. When you do the exercise and then you do the cold exposure, testosterone and luteinizing hormone go down. Now, I don't know what the Japanese guys were thinking. They're like, let's just switch it up. Let's do the cold exposure first, and then we'll do the exercise. And we'll see if we get the same effect. Opposite effect. Testosterone went through the roof. Luteinizing hormone went through the roof. And I'm going, but that's what I've been doing. Like, I get in my forge and I'm not a workout guy. I'm not a runner, for heaven's sakes. I wasn't doing it for muscle soreness or exercise recovery. I was doing it because I was scared out of my ass about the prostate specific antigen. And then I'd come out and I'd be cold. So I got to warm up. So I got to do my jumping jacks. Jason and I took this steel mace flow class from Leo Savage because, we're kind of crazy. So I pick up my steel mace and I'm doing my 360s and stuff. And I get some push-ups because I'm trying to warm up. Not a lot of exercise. In the Japanese study, they didn't do a lot of cold exposure and they only did 20 minutes on a exercise bike. And so I'm doing more cold and I'm doing a little bit heavier load, but not the whole duration. And I'm like, well, damn, I think that's it. Hey, Jason, why don't you get your testosterone checked? So he does. His birthday's in the fall. Every fall, he gets his checked. He was like mid 500s. I don't know. It's in the article. 2 years later, on this program of exercising after the ice, he's at 990. Now, he's like 43. I don't have a biological age, but his chronological age, he's going to turn 43 this fall, if I'm remembering that correctly. I don't give a crap. 1140, 990 at any age, that is a healthy man. And there are a lot of guys I've spoken with that have read the article and they don't always want to say where they are, what they're working on, but they'll say, would you tell me how you did that? Will you tell me, like, what are the exercises that I should do? What could you direct me to the study? What kind of, how long should it take? And the answer is, I don't know. I have a Japanese study from 1991, and I have two guys, me and Jason, who are now riding these really super healthy testosterone levels. I could use more people. I could, like, if we get up to N equals 3 or 4, if you would go get your testosterone checked, start exercising after your ice bath and come back to me in 6 months, maybe I could get some more robust data. We could publish a protocol and we could tell other men, this is what you can expect. Now, at your age, it's probably not a big deal. You get up to my age, and there are a lot of guys who, I'm going to say this, needlessly suffering. They'll go see their doctor. Maybe they'll be in the 400s, and the doctor's like, well, you're not too bad. But their body composition isn't right. Their mood isn't right. Their libido isn't right. And they shouldn't have to settle for something that their doctor says, well, still not too bad. I'd rather get them up to more optimum health.
Well, I definitely know you have a third. As we spoke on the phone before, my client has actually seen some benefits as well. He went up 50 plus points, and he's going to actually have his tested, I believe, within the next 2 weeks or so. So
That'd be great.
I'll have another little update for you there. He was interested in checking it out. I personally have not done mine yet. Something I'm afraid of needles.
I don't blame you, James. I hated it,
I
but
can get in the cold tub, but I absolutely hate needles. I hate needles.
I used to. I was in the pediatric intensive care unit with my 6-year-old son, and his doctor is our neighbor. And he said, your son was hours away from a diabetic coma because he was undiagnosed diabetic. He handed me an orange. He handed me a syringe. He said, nobody's leaving this hospital until you figure this out. And at that point, I was like, fuck fear of needles. I'm not afraid of needles. I just had to make a decision. Mm-hmm. I was working on the orange, and then I thought, okay, I got to learn how to inject my son with insulin. And what kind of wimp am I if I'm not able to do it myself? So I practiced on myself, just so that I could be comfortable with the jab, and I knew what he was experiencing. And I'm not going to be afraid of needles anymore. You know what I'm afraid of even more? Losing my son, or whatever other nightmare image will come to mind that motivates me when they're drawing blood. So
get my ass
out. Do it, James. Yeah.
All right.
Don't bitch out.
You have my word. You have my word. I got you.
That's terrific. Thank you.
Gotcha. I'll be part of your experiment. I'm my own guinea pig. That's what I've been doing since 2015.
Aren't we all? That's what biohacking is all about.
Yeah.
But, since we talked on the phone, we had a phone conversation getting ready for this podcast. And since we talked on the phone, I thought, it's been a while. I made an appointment. I'm going in on Wednesday. I'm going to get the T levels checked again. And I don't know. Something in me is saying, look, you're not going to be 1180, but it doesn't freaking matter. I got to get a number, and we'll see what it is, and I'll let people know.
Mm-hmm. And I'll update it.
Yeah, it'd be great.
So what are the chemicals? So once you go in to the cold plunge, like what are the chemicals that are getting released, or the hormones that are getting released? So you have adrenaline, noradrenaline, or norepinephrine, cortisol spike, which cortisol would be an antagonist to testosterone. No, so if your cortisol is chronically elevated, then you would see people that have low testosterone, but in an acute case, it doesn't seem to be as detrimental.
Your body makes cortisol for good reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But when, like you say, it's an acute response to stress. You've activated your sympathetic nervous system. You're in the fight or flight mode. Your body's going to make cortisol. Good for it. But that doesn't mean that cortisol is going to stick around forever. Huberman is really the expert on this. He's got a good podcast on cold exposure and what happens, but he maybe spent too much time talking about the dopamine. Again, there's a really good study. Dopamine and norepinephrine were the focus of this study because they were looking at this, what is it? The HPA, the hypothalamus pituitary axis. They wanted to know about the neurotransmitters more than about metabolic responses. So they were focusing on that. Huberman did like a review of the paper on his podcast. And the amazing thing was the huge dopamine rush that you get. When they say 250%, a lot of people don't do the math. That's 3.5 times the level of dopamine. And again, the dopamine doesn't stick around forever, but it's no wonder you come out of the forge and you feel like Superman. Like there's a feeling of euphoria that can overcome the person who has just done 4 minutes in the cold, because that is the dopamine hitting their brain at the same time that they're beginning to rewarm their limbs. The vasoconstriction is beginning to pass. The pain in their toes and their fingers is no longer with them. And they're like, I feel amazing. So it's no surprise that sometimes you start a regular cold practice and you start craving. Like I did one this morning, and we've been talking about ice baths for so long, James. I'm like, I want to get back. I'm going in.
You can do the rest
as
of the
soon as
show.
the door over.
You can bring your laptop or your computer over there and just do the rest of the show.
We'll broadcast it.
Yeah.
I don't know. There might be regulations against that the way I go. But in any case, yeah, I'm going in for another dip this afternoon. Sometimes I will get a craving, and it could be because my body is signaling to me, we want those neurotransmitters. We want those hormones. There is a cascade of changes that happens when you get into the ice bath. Some of them are neurological. Some of them are metabolic. So hormones, neurotransmitters, I might be using these the two different categories of chemicals that your body can produce. And sometimes they get confused. I might be one of the people who's confusing them. Metabolically, what happens is your muscles, if you're shivering, I don't shiver that much unless I've had a really bad day, unless I'm stressed about a fight with my girlfriend or I'm, anxious about something, then I will get a shiver. I don't think it's even a cold thermogenesis shiver. I think it's a trauma shiver. Peter Levine writes about it in his book, Waking the Tiger. But if your muscles are shivering, it's because they're sucking glucose out of, it's not a technical word. They're using glucose. They're clearing glucose from your bloodstream, burning it inside your muscles, which are trembling like this because you don't have enough brown fat. That's shivering thermogenesis. And it's great. It improves your insulin sensitivity, clears glucose out of your bloodstream. As I mentioned before, the white fat's got to get involved because without enough glucose, you might get some glucagon spike coming out of your liver, trying to prepare you for this fight or flight. If there isn't enough, then the white fat's like, here's some lipids, take them, release them into the bloodstream. Brown fat will scoop those out of the bloodstream, burn those just to create heat. This is your mammalian, and this is your evolutionary biological response to try and maintain homeostasis. Same time, your veins in your extremities will begin to constrict. Blood flow will shut down to your fingertips, to your toes, and then to your arm, to your legs, because keeping the blood inside where the vital organs are, that's your body's first priority. If your limbs are cold, the body's like, the heck with that. If I send blood out to the arm, the blood will get cold. And when it comes back to the heart, it will make the heart cold. That's no good. So it shuts down the circulatory system. It's called vasoconstriction to the extremities in the hope of keeping the internal organs warm. That's why it hurts, because these are smooth muscle tissues. They're not attached to your skeleton. They constrict and it's kind of like they spasm. There's no way to exercise your smooth muscle tissue except to do vasoconstriction. And cold exposure is the fastest, best way to do vasoconstriction. So your muscles clamp down, and it's like having a cramp, but focused on your fingertips or your toes. That pain is the vasoconstriction. Terrific. All of these things are happening immediately. In the meantime, your adrenal glands, which are down by your kidneys, they begin to produce noradrenaline. And it takes a little time for that to reach your brain. So now these neuroactive biochemical responses, they're kicking in after vasoconstriction, after activation of brown fat, after shivering. Although there's the cascade, it might take like 30 seconds for that norepinephrine to start hitting your brain, just because of the way your circulation system is adjusting. So what happens to a lot of people is we'll see them undergo the gasp reflex. We'll see them, they're feeling the pain of vasoconstriction. They're beginning to feel the urge to shiver. And then they go like this. They get this stupid grin on their face. My daughter is the best example. I call it her ice face, because then they'll go, this hurts so much. But it's involuntary, because that noradrenaline, that norepinephrine is the same thing, two different words. It gets up into the brain, and you start feeling happy up here, even while everything else in your body is saying, this is ridiculous and I hate you. So metabolic, neurological, These changes are involuntary, and they're taking place inside your body. And it helps to kind of have an understanding of what to expect, because it takes the anxiety level down. You're like, oh, that's the noradrenaline. And then you get out and you're like, oh, this is what dopamine feels like. And everything has a biochemical explanation. Here's what's under your control. Your breath, because you know that the breath is the doorway between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic system. It's the doorway between what happens automatically and what happens voluntarily. Your heart, unless you are a monastic, your heart is going to do what your heart is going to do. Your digestive system is going to do what it can do. Now, some people claim that they can, like Vim, can control his immune system. He can turn that on and off. He can activate brown fat with the power of his mind. And I believe him. It's been measured. Scott Carney wrote about it. But I'm not there. For me, that doorway is the breath. I can let my breath do whatever it's going to do, and my body will take care of it for me. Or I can say, I'm going to box breathe. I'm going to do 6 in, 4 out, or, the other way around, whatever works for you. I'm going to count down from 10. I'm going to take control. I'm going to make my breath conscious. You can do that. The other thing that you have control of is your thoughts, your self-talk. Adrienne has this great mantra that she developed when she was first starting her cold practice. Adrienne's Jason's wife. And she wanted nothing to do with our crazy antics, filling up a tub with ice. She grew up in Florida. She lives in Phoenix. Guarantee you there's no brown fat on this woman at the time, because she just didn't have any cold exposure. And she'd be the first one to say, I hate the cold. But she was also suffering from Hashimoto's thyroiditis. She was suffering from allergies, urticaria. She was not, talk about dis-ease. She was not healthy. And so when she saw us totally getting into this, some part of her was like, I got to see what this is about. Her first ice bath, if I remember correctly, was like 9 seconds. She dropped in, she sprung out. She looked like Wile E. Coyote, jumping up in some kind of Bugs Bunny cartoon. And the good thing about the ice bath is something is happening right away. It's not like red light or a tanning booth or whatever else, where you're like, well, I feel good. Maybe if I do that, or hyperbaric, you got to do hyperbaric for weeks before you're really getting a measurable, sensational, or a change you can sense. But cold exposure, something's happening. And Adrienne's like, I don't know what that was, but I'm going to do it again. She developed a mantra to allow her to get past that 9-second mark. This is what cold feels like. And it's so smart, because every part of your body is screaming at your brain, you're going to die, James. Get us out of here right away. And you can't say a negative to your body. You can't say, we're not going to die, toes. Because your body can't hear a negative. It can't translate a don't do that, can't do that, not that. You have to talk positive to your body, just like you have to talk positive to your kids. I don't know if you have kids, but if I tell my kids, don't forget your homework, what do they hear? Forget your homework. Don't run down the hall. They're running, because all you have to do is delete one word. But for the body to understand a don't requires this extraordinary translation that only the brain can do. You can't talk to your toes with don't. You have to send them a positive message that pushes out the we're gonna die. This is what cold feels like. And so Adrienne would get in there and she would tell her fingers, this is what cold feels like. And the fingers, you have to imagine this conversation. The fingers like, oh, no, this isn't cold, this is death. And Adrienne said, this is cold. She'd say to her toes, this is cold. Cold feels just like this. Can you feel the cold? I feel the cold because this is what cold feels like. Everything comes down. I got brainwave data on this. We took the Muse headset, wrapped around the forehead, and we had an experienced meditator, a naive meditator. We're measuring them warm, dry, on the mat, doing their thing. Here's their brainwaves. And sure enough, the experienced meditator could get himself down into a meditative, I forget what word Muse was doing, but a calm state. He could keep himself there pretty good. He'd jump out every once in a while. And the novice meditator, she would pop in and out. Then we put them in the forge and we gave them this is what cold feels like mantra. And we gave them the structured breathing to do. They went down into calm and they stayed there like you wouldn't believe. It was an instantaneous meditative state in their brain, and they held it for the entire time. You wouldn't think that. You're like, I'm supposed to be fight or flight right now. But when you adopt this is what cold feels like. You take control of all those autonomic reactions, everything that used to be out of your control, and you're telling your cells what's happening. Your brain is in boss. And don't give that up. Don't give up your breath. Just because all these other, just because you're making noradrenaline doesn't mean you have to give up your breath. Doesn't mean you have to give up your thoughts. So I have these conversations. I know it sounds like the weirdest thing, James, but I have these conversations with different parts of my body. Hey, kidneys, how are you doing today? You like this cold? And there'll be times. This is all from my daughter. There'll be times when I'm aching or I'm hurting, and I used to get angry. My toe, my ankle. You roll your ankle. Now it won't perform the way you want it to perform. You got to sit out the rest of the volleyball game or whatever the heck it is. And I used to get angry. And my daughter was like, Dad, your ankle's still on the team. Your ankle needs your love. Mm-hmm. I was like, oh, so I'll go into the toe, and if something's hurting, I'll say, it's okay. Take your time, toe. We need you, toe. You're on the team. We love you, toe. And we're going to send all the healing energy to you so we can get you off the bench and back onto the field of play as soon as you're ready. I have this weird thing, this kind of meditative state where I'm communing with different parts of my body. Well, my daughter told this story. She's in Krav Maga. She's like this level 3, instructor thing. And she brings this philosophy about her relationship with her body. She was sparring with the black belts. It's over her head. And the black belts know how to be careful about it because she's less experienced, even though she's been at this for like 3 years. And her knee gave out, collapsed. And right away, the black belt's like, I did something, did I kick too hard? Did I do a thing? And we don't know why. But she's down on the mat and she puts her hands around her knee. And the black belts are all like, oh, crap, if this turns into a 911 situation, we're all going to be in trouble. Are you okay? And my daughter's like, I love you, knee. And she begins kissing the knee. She goes, Dad, you got to Mr. Miyagi that. You got to put the love on the part that is hurting. So I think about those things too. I send positive messages to my body when I'm in the forge.
It's actually something I've been thinking about for a while because I look into water a lot, and I've been looking like imprinting for a while now. And we are water, like we're composed of water. So words really matter. So if people are talking about themselves in a negative way, like it's going to express itself. Like water is going to take the shape of its container. So I know you can't judge a book by its cover, but you can kind of see that some people don't really treat their bodies, or they don't have very nice things to say about it. And it's going to reflect. The body does listen. The body does listen.
It has no choice. Language is a technology. Like a calculator is a technology for solving math problems. Okay. Language is not something that Homo sapiens were just, biologically endowed with. It was invented by our ancestors. It's a technique or a technology to solve a problem. So what does language do? Language is a technology that is invented to improve the quality of our thinking. Just like a calculator is invented to improve the quality of our calculations, language changes the way we think. And there's some good stuff in brain morphology. Children who are illiterate, they can't read. They have different brains than children who do read. If you've ever taken a foreign language, I remember the moment I was in college in German, and I was not a very good student, but I was in German 3. and over my head, and I got this dictionary, I was translating all these things, and I was walking from my dorm to, like, I don't know, maybe it was a physics final. And I caught myself thinking in German. There is a transition that you make when you're studying a foreign language in which you are now able to think in the foreign language, because language is a technology for improving the quality of our thinking. The words that come to us automatically, like, we say them out here, but they come right back to us in here and change the way we think. So now I'm very conscious of words. I want to avoid the don'ts. Oh, I don't want that. What do you want? I want to avoid the negative because it takes away my creativity. I want to be more precise in what sometimes I don't even know what I think until I say it, And sometimes I have to say things to try it on. And when I catch myself hurting myself with my words, I'll sometimes ask for a do-over. Like, how when we're little kids and there's an argument, well, was that a foul ball? Well, so we're going to do a do-over, Yeah. Do-over is an incredibly powerful thing. I'll be in the middle of a conversation with my girlfriend, and she might be offended by something I said that was careless, or maybe I was imprecise, or I didn't get it right. And I'm not satisfied with myself. And I'll say, could I have a do-over? And she'll say, okay.
I might take that one. I might take that. No, and I admire how well you articulate. I kind of caught that over the phone or on our first chat. So going back to the hormones and all the noradrenaline being released, and you're in like a state of fight or flight acutely, could cold exposure be detrimental to people that are literally just maybe on their last limb? Like, would there be any contraindications?
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen people with PTSD that get activated by the cold exposure. So we have a rule: no coercion. There's no peer pressure. There's no shame. There's no moral judgment. You must get into the cold of your own volition and come out of your own free will, because stuff comes up.
Yeah.
And even if somebody, my daughter did this with one of her Krav students. I don't think that woman did 2 seconds. She got in, she popped out, and everybody's laughing because it was kind of funny. And my daughter's like, way to go. You just got like the first benefit, which is you did something really hard that scared you. That's the most important benefit. Mike Mutzel, he talks about microdosing the cold. He's like, do 15 seconds, because those 15 seconds you had to get over a psychological hurdle, and you did it. And get out. You prove your point. No moral judgment, because this isn't a moral exercise. Now, you might see Joe Rogan. He's in his forge for 20 minutes because Jocko Willink called him up and said, hey, my kid does 20, or, whatever Jocko says to people. And now Joe's got to go and make a meme of it on Instagram, and it blew up. I'm not taking anything away from Joe. If Joe wants to do 20 minutes because he's got a personal goal, then he's doing it. If he'd gotten out after, his first one was a minute and a half. Way to go, Joe. You just did something difficult. So no coercion, no shame. When things come up, there is a danger that people will be re-experiencing the unresolved trauma. This is called an emotional flashback. When you re-experience an unresolved trauma, you reinforce it. You're practicing it again. The brain is learning that neural pathway to the unresolved trauma, and it increases the maladaptive state. So I have seen people for whom things came up, and sometimes they'll do like 4 ice baths and it's not a problem. But something happened in their lives. It's made them sensitive some way. They experience an emotional flashback, and they got to get out. They can get out. What do you need now? Do you need a hug? Do you need some red light? Do you need, like, whatever it is? We're going to do that. I wish that I understood. It's partly my curiosity. I wish I understood it well enough to be able to say, this is the kind of thing that's coming up for you. And this is the kind of care and therapeutic intervention that might help you right now. Because there is something called exposure therapy. Are you familiar with this?
No.
When done correctly, it's incredibly therapeutic. So I'm going to use this simple example. Somebody's afraid of snakes and they have a phobia of snakes. Just like thinking about a snake will cause a biophysical response, a reaction in their body. And so exposure therapy is say, well, first we're going to say the word snake. Then we're going to look at like a crayon drawing of a snake. Then we're going to look at a picture of a snake. And when this is done correctly, 3 hours later, they're like petting a boa constrictor or something, because they extinguish the fear out of the fear of, say, the phobia by titrating their experience with the phobia in these tiny little drop-like increments. They change and they manage what used to be an involuntary biochemical response. Now that's phobia. A similar thing can happen with unresolved trauma. Trauma is a stressful experience that never got resolution. Mm-hmm. Like we can have stress, but if we're not immobilized, if we remain empowered, it can actually be good for us, make us stronger, like exercise does. So Peter Levine's got these great books on trauma and PTSD. Waking the Tiger and Unspoken Voice is another one. And Peter says that one of the essential mechanisms for ensuring that stress does not become PTSD is movement. One way to almost guarantee that you take a stressful experience and turn it into PTSD is to immobilize someone. So he describes the experience of when he got hit by a car and he was still conscious and he's laying prone on the road and like the ambulance is coming, and there happened to be a EMT, and the EMT was trying to immobilize him because the EMT was worried about a neck fracture. But Peter was cogent enough to say, get away from me, because he wanted to tremble. He wanted to shake. He was aware that if he couldn't move, he would not be releasing the trauma. Sure enough, he emerged from the experience without PTSD, and he knew. He was in the ambulance asking the nurse to take this vital sign, take his temperature and do something else so that he could detect whether he was at risk for PTSD. He was like, oh, thank God, I'm going to be fine. And he says it was the trembling that was critical. He couldn't move. He's immobilized by the crash, but just his body trembling was a way of releasing the stress so it doesn't become PTSD. You've seen, I don't know if you're a hunter. I'm not a hunter, but I've heard accounts from hunters of the animal that does the same thing, that is shivering and shaking when it's trapped. Levine says, and there's some other good articles on this, that people who have undergone brain surgery, it's an extreme trauma to their nervous system. They come out, they often have what's called a post-operative shiver or a shake or a tremble, 3 different words for it. And the physicians have been accustomed to either immobilizing or administering drugs so they don't shake. And Peter Levine's like, let them tremble, because there's been so much trauma happening up here. They need to release that. So one of the things that can happen, it happens to my friend with Parkinson's and it happens to me. If I'm anxious and I get in the forge, I'll start shivering. Now people say, should you shiver or should you not shiver? And I always answer, it depends on what you're working on. If you're working on your metabolism and you're new to cold exposure, shiver. That's great. You're burning up all that glucose. If you're working on your psychological resilience, shiver. That's great, because there's something in some anxiety in you that needs to get released. If what you're working on, if you're more advanced, not a novice, and what you're working on is, I really want to activate my brown fat. I really want to recruit new brown fat. Try and relax that shiver. Don't shiver. Don't let your muscles warm you up. If you can help it, just like Vim does, focus on that brown fat tissue. It's sitting at the base of your neck, above your clavicles, around your heart. Focus your attention at that space right at the base of your neck, sort of at the top of your shoulder blades, and say, I want to turn that on. Do that instead of shiver. So it depends on where you are and what you're working on. And I have seen stuff come up for people that I wish I could help them with. And I'm trying to teach myself, I'm trying to learn more about how to do that, because I know what's coming up is emotional and it's related to unresolved trauma.
I could definitely see that. And then I imagine introducing someone to cold exposure, if they're just in and out really quick, they may want to run away. Maybe a sign that they're not even ready to deal with that. So that's why it's got to be voluntary.
Yep.
The movement part, I noticed when I would do like self-myofascial release, I'll put a lacrosse ball on my glute or something like that, and all of a sudden, like this weird emotion, this thought would come up, like, why am I sad all of a sudden? What the hell is that? I'm like, all right, let me feel this and actually process it, and that's it. It's gone. But there's like a lot of buried stuff, so I could definitely see how that comes up with the cold exposure, because all the vasoconstriction too. It's like you got so much moving right now.
I was told, I haven't checked this out, but I was told that the fascia is part of the nervous system. So it would be no surprise. Like I was told that electrical signals will travel through the fascia faster than they'll travel through your nerves. So if you're doing some, what'd you call it? Myofascial or self-fascial release, and emotions come up, all of a sudden that sort of corroborates this assertion that the fascia is part of your nervous system, because you're creating a stimulus. Feelings might come up with that. It makes sense to me. What do you do with them?
Feel them, honestly. That's what I say. It's like, if I wouldn't say you always have to act on them, because if I always acted on my feelings, I don't know if I'd still be here right now.
That's a good point.
So
I rip a page out of Adrian's notebook, and sometimes I say, this is what sadness feels like. I'm like, oh, crap. And then, some other part of my body will be like, well, is it going to last forever? Because there's some child in me that confuses the present moment with eternity. But I get to have a dialogue with that part. Say, no, it's just now.
And you mentioned earlier with kids, I have one on the way, and we're actually going through a class. And
congratulations.
Thank you. They're mentioning how a lot of birth is actually traumatic, and the kid, the baby is still conscious. We may not understand that fully for whatever reason, but it's like they're experiencing this world too. They just don't know how to vocalize it, and everything that they go through in the hospitals, like that's traumatic. You're not out in nature. You're not grounded.
When is your child due?
September 25th. So next month.
Okay. So you're pretty far along, and you're taking a class. What are you reading?
We've read so much. Nutrition books as always.
Okay. Lots of protein?
Lots of protein.
That's good.
Salt, a lot of water.
Okay.
We took like this mineral course. We have really good filtered water, shower filters. We're doing pretty well over here.
Do you have a doula?
No.
Do you have a birth plan?
We have a midwife, and we're gonna.
Okay, that's cool. Do you have a written birth plan?
We're working on that.
Okay.
We established that we're actually having the baby in home instead of at the center. So.
What state are you in?
Florida.
Mine were born in New York, where it is illegal for a physician to attend a home birth. So I don't know how the Amish figure that out, but we had to have ours in the hospital because we were in New York. And we're working on a written birth plan. Is the right answer? Here's something I want you to do. Get a book called Pregnancy, Childbirth, and the Newborn. And it's not really a conflict of interest, but I should let you know, my aunt wrote it. She founded an organization called Doulas of North America. So of course, at that time, 26 years ago or whatever it was, when I was at that stage, I'm reading my aunt's book. I'm not reading that What to Expect When You're Expecting. I'm going to read the book that my aunt wrote for me, and it is fantastic. I am not much of a planner, but she is a big advocate of the birth plan. And she's not She's not moral or judgmental. She's not a big advocate of non-medicalized natural home birth or whatever. She's a big advocate of having a plan. Know what you want. Know what would cause you to make a decision that is different from what you want. So she might say, if you know you want an epidural, write epidural down in the birth plan. She's not judging it. She didn't do it, but that's because it's not right for her. It might be right for someone else. Then let's say you don't want the epidural and you're like, we're not doing epidural. That stuff is ridiculous. No one's sticking a needle in my wife's spinal cord, or, whatever it is. You and your wife agree on this. And then my aunt would say, okay, under what conditions would you change your mind? And that is super freaking important. When she taught me what planning really was, planning is not an idealized script of everything that you fantasize is going to happen. Planning is, how do we know we're on track? What do we do when we're getting off track? Planning is like all these contingencies. So, we didn't want the epidural. What would convince you to change your mind? And we thought about this, and we thought, what is it? Tearing and pain and blah, blah. We said, nope. We would rather do the water tub. There were other things available to us for pain management that we were going to do. And all those options were going to have to be exhausted before we did the epidural. But sure enough, my wife is 7 centimeters or something like that. And she's like, I so want that epidural. We had a plan. And you complaining is not what would change our mind about the epidural. And I'm being the doula. And it's my job to execute on the plan because, frankly, she's mentally incapacitated. You don't take a woman in the throes of childbirth and ask her to, oh, do you want an ice pack, honey? Like, what the hell? How's she supposed to know what she wants? You're just going to get your neck like wrung, And our midwife was so clever because midwife knew that pushing was going to be tough, but my wife only had like this much more to go. Midwife set up a mirror. And so she said, okay, I hear you about the epidural. It's probably too late for the epidural to take effect, but we'll do the epidural because it's very important to you. There's just one thing that I want to do before the epidural. And I'm standing there going, this woman is good. She sets a mirror up and she says, I want you to see the crown of your baby's head before we do the epidural. And my wife is looking, I don't see anything. But my wife is like, that's my baby. And the midwife says, yeah, that's the crown of his head. He's got a lot of hair. And my wife is like, I'm pushing. So we had a plan. We weren't going to deviate from the plan, but we needed this little extra from the midwife to keep us, to keep our morale up and our spirits high, get the energy that's needed for the last push. Now, my wife tore. Okay. That hurt. Okay. I forget. It was like 4 stitches. And she was so glad afterwards that she didn't have the epidural because the sensation of breastfeeding, the recovery is faster, the oxytocin bonding with the child is faster. And she was like, thank you. If there had been a different condition, like we didn't want a fetal heart monitor. Okay, my aunt says, what would change your mind if the physician or the midwife says that our baby's in distress? Like if they get some other indication that says that something is not progressing, even if it's slow, along a normal path, or they suspect that the umbilical cord, and we had a series of contingencies. We say, okay, then we'll get a fetal heart monitor. Well, by the time my daughter came around 2.5 years later, we're like, we don't want this, we don't want that, we don't want the other thing. When we were admitted to the hospital, they tried to put us in a wheelchair. We were like, don't want that, Our confidence was through the roof because we'd already been through so much. There was no tearing. I mean, it was a beautiful experience. And yet we knew what would convince you to have a C-section. Baby's life in danger, mother's life in danger. These are the kinds of danger signs. Like we'd gone there in our imagination, just in case. What would convince you to have an ultrasound? We didn't want an ultrasound. We didn't want any of that stuff. But if this happens and this happens, then yes, of course, we would consent. So why am I telling you all this as part of the podcast that would probably never Like you can edit all this out because it's an amazing book. I want you to have a birth plan, especially you're being at home. You should both read it. You have enough time to get through it. And if your experience is anything like mine, you're going to like, oh, holy wow, I didn't know that. I didn't have that. You're going to be mentally so much better prepared for everything good and bad that can happen. Nothing is going to phase you.
I'm definitely going to look into that one.
In the meantime, I got like 3 articles on pregnancy and childbirth and cold exposure. And it's one of the best things she can do.
Right now?
Uh-huh.
That'd be a very hard sell. I don't know if I'm that good of a salesman.
Then just read the science. Read the experiences of the women that are in these articles. One of them, she's got a doctorate in microbiology. She's German. She's Wim Hof trained. Her name is Dr. Josephine Warsek, or Josephine Warsek, PhD. And she chronicled the whole thing on Instagram. So, I popped in some citations. I've done some really good work in the library on the reviews of cold exposure and pregnancy. First, it's good for conception and fertility, but you're past that point. Now you're in like this last trimester. And the last trimester is when metabolic disorders begin to become acute. The metabolic demands of the child are extraordinary at this point. A lot of women will, because their carb and protein ratio is out of whack, maybe they get toxemia, maybe they get inflammation, maybe they get swollen ankles. Well, guess what's good for your metabolism? Cold exposure. They've even monitored fetal temperatures under extreme heat and extreme cold to discover what, how well protected is the fetus from the cold. And the answer is extremely well protected. Heat, very bad for pregnant women. All kinds of deleterious outcomes. Cold, very good. So, there's some case studies. They're on. If you Google ice bath pregnancy, it's one of the 2 keywords in like the whole, panoply of Google in which we will come up, as one of the top ranked sites, because nobody else out there is touching it. It's like the 3rd rail of health and wellness. Don't mess with pregnant women. And I would not be writing these articles if the science and experience was not backing it up. Postpartum, get her in the heat. Everything changes. When the baby is now outside the womb and it's time to breastfeed the child, get her in the sauna. But no sauna and no heat until after the childbirth. Go with the cold.
And would there be like a certain temperature threshold? So I guess that would lead into the next question. For a pregnant
It doesn't
woman,
have to be that cold. It doesn't have to be very cold at all. Like
so
50 is fine. Anything that feels cold, like below the what we call the thermal comfort line or thermal neutrality. And for your wife, 50 might be like, oh my God, what are you doing to me? That's fine. If she feels cold, then it's cold. And maybe that gives her a little more confidence. But I've had one woman do 34 degrees.
Wow.
There's thermal images of her on our website, and she loved it. It took her swelling down. She felt much more mobile the next day. And she tried to keep, like, this is in her last trimester, and she tried to keep her belly up out of the water just to increase her comfort level. And so I cross-checked this with Warsek, and I'm like, so what do you think? She said, it's fine. I mean, belly in, belly out, either way is fine. The fetus is very well protected. The mom doesn't have to be in there for very long. Like 34 is fine. But Warsek and her sister, they weren't doing 34. They were doing more like mid 40s. I don't know. It's Celsius. You got to translate. But it doesn't have to be very cold. And what I'm telling you is what's been documented in the scientific literature and the experiences of the other women. It sounds like your wife is taking good care of herself nutritionally. It sounds like you're very conscious. And if there's no problem to correct, then don't do it. Like this is, I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not giving medical advice. I'm saying this is what has happened and it worked well for other women.
So does it have to be full body, or I know when I go in the tub, if I just put my feet in there, it's miserable. I
Yep,
can't stand it.
I agree.
So it
I got to
has,
go at least above my belly button, or like you say, I'm miserable. But I like going all the way up to my chin. I want to get all my brown fat
yeah.
submerged. Mm-hmm.
So the brown fat, it's what were you saying earlier about the mitochondria in the brown fat compared to anywhere else? And
Brown
you're
fat,
going ketosis as soon as you get in the cold, no?
brown fat have more mitochondria than any other cell in your body, because I shouldn't say the only job. Brown fat do a lot of interesting things. Their principal job is to produce heat, to turn glucose and fat into heat. And they need mitochondria for that. They also produce thyroid hormone. More thyroid hormone comes out of your brown fat than comes out of any other part of your body, including the thyroid. So Adrienne had a dysregulated thyroid because she had no brown fat. When she started doing ice baths, guess what happened to her Hashimoto's thyroiditis? Resolved. And they told her that she would be on thyroid medication for the rest of her life. And she's not, because she just needed to recruit brown fat into her body so the brown fat could produce the thyroid stimulating hormone that modulates the action of her thyroid. So brown fat is an amazing organ. It's packed with mitochondria. For your body to recruit new brown fat in response to cold exposure, it needs to create a lot of new mitochondria. They're going to need the nutritional requirements, magnesium, incredibly important. And your body's going to sort through its existing mitochondria. It's going to say, which are the really good ones? And it's going to duplicate the best mitochondria that you've got out of whatever nutritional elements are available to you and pack them into your brown fat. So what I need to work more on, another article waiting for me to write, is mitochondrial therapies. There are such things. Most of them are nutritional. And that sounds great. I want to see if anybody's been doing cold exposure as a mitochondrial therapy. What happens as a consequence of activating and recruiting new brown fat is insulin sensitivity goes way through the roof. And because pregnancy is so demanding metabolically, you've probably heard a term called gestational diabetes. You get these temporary metabolic disorders because if the woman weren't pregnant, the doctor would look at her and go, oh, yeah, you're fine. Your glucose tolerance, fine. It's all within range. But with the additional stress, a marginal metabolism can be pushed over into a type 2 diabetes condition, but just during gestation. Keeping the insulin sensitivity high is critical for metabolism, so there isn't too much insulin running around the body. And this improves the metabolic health of the woman and also of the child. So a little cold exposure, now again, she might be doing great with her diet. A little cold exposure has been shown to have, in the epidemiological studies, lots of benefits for pregnant women. About the ketones, you will start producing, it won't pull you into full-on ketosis, but you will start producing ketones as soon as you get into the cold. It's the fastest way to stimulate endogenous ketone production. So ordinarily it would take like 3 days to get into ketosis or something. It depends upon how many carbs you've been eating, what are your glycogen stores like. You can get into ketosis faster by using up glucose via cold exposure, or if you're just looking for a little ketone boost without switching all the way over into ketosis, get in the cold, you get some ketones, you'll use them up, and that's okay. Another way is to take exogenous ketones. You can buy them, and they'll get into your bloodstream. You'll use those up. So it's a similar kind of thing.
And the areas of brown fat mainly would be like the nape of the neck, belly, and I said around the chest.
Why do you say the belly?
I was just asking.
No, not so much. We got a good scan on our website that somebody did. It's the PET scan, and it's the feature image on an article called "Ice Bath Science: Facts, Myths, and Mysteries," and it shows where the brown fat lights up in the PET scan. So you're going to see it at the base of the neck, around the clavicles, a little bit around the heart. But it's not a belly thing. It's not down where the white fat accumulates. And it makes sense. The brown fat is going to be as close to the organs that need the heat as you can get it. So what needs the heat? Your heart, your brain. Well, I guess if you could surround the brain with brown fat, wouldn't that be great? But you can't. All you can do is put it on the blood vessels that take blood up to the brain. So that's what your body does. It's going to put the brown fat on the most vital organs, and your belly just ain't it.
We were talking earlier, and what you were saying kind of made a whole lot of sense, where right now we're living very, very comfortably. We are adapted to need the cold, but we just don't have it anymore. So I'm in Florida. It never gets cold down here. Tap water, even in the shower, is not going to get very cold. And you mentioning the brown fat being the biggest source of thyroid hormone, it's kind of just very enlightening to see, it's not that we're missing so much thing. It's like we're just, well, I mean, we're not living how we should. I know that.
Correct. Sure. Yep.
But it's really not that hard to get back to an optimal level of health.
Well, yeah, what is our cheapest ice bath? Like $10,000? Not everybody has that. I mean, you could say, so that makes it difficult. And not everybody needs to do it every day like I do. Get some. I was talking to Joe Mercola. He runs the most popular biohacking alt medicine website. FDA hates him. And he's like, yeah, I'm pretty good with the amount of cold exposure I got in my life, Tom. Atlantic Ocean's right there. He lives in Florida too. And I want to say, no, Joe, that's not cold enough for you, but he's content and he's in good shape. So I'm not going to, no coercion. Every once in a while, you want to fill up your bathtub with some ice, get it down to 50 degrees, get in there, do 4 or 5 minutes. It's going to make a huge difference. You know how they say with exercise, 20 minutes a week. There's the difference between somebody who gets no exercise and here's somebody who goes for a walk 20 minutes. And it's like a huge benefit. Most people are so far behind the curve that a little bit will do them a world of good. Now, me, I'm trying the crazy stuff. How do I get my biological age down into the 20s? How do I get my testosterone up over 1200? Part of the role in society of the artist is to have the experiences that the rest of the people don't want to have. The artist is going to go out and do this crazy stuff, or the stunt man. And then people are going to be like, wow, that's really cool. I wonder how that works out for him. They want to watch the tightrope walker. And if he's not, suspended over Niagara Falls, nobody watches a tightrope walker on the parking lot because that's not exciting. They want to watch the danger. So part of the job of the artist is to go have experiences that other people don't want to have and then interpret them for the rest of us. This is what happens when I do this, right? We don't think of scientists in this way. Part of the job of the scientist is to go investigate the things that other people either don't want to because it's too risky or too expensive, or don't have the expertise to, and report back to the rest of us. What happens when? So, we experiment on animals. What happens when you implant colorectal tumors in mice and then you house some of them at 4 degrees centigrade versus 30 degrees centigrade, and you measure the growth of the tumors? Oh, you find out that 4 degrees centigrade inhibits tumor growth. That's the scientist's job. Go create the knowledge that people weren't necessarily asking for that, but now that you've done it, report it back to the rest of the world. So I'm living somewhere between the artist and the scientist. It is my job to do crazy stuff and report back to you how that worked out for me. It is not my job to tell you or the mother of your child, for that matter, what to do. However, I'm also a professor. I give homework and reading assignments. So I want you to get pregnancy, childbirth, and newborn.
Now I'm your student.
Right.
Sounds good.
That's my job, James.
Oh man, I graduated in 2013. I didn't know I'd be back in the classroom.
No, we're students for life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Separated. So you have self-actual engineering. Would you mind explaining a little bit what that is?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. Because I reached a point in my career as a research engineer. I started environmental engineering. I went to sustainability, and resilience turned out to be kind of an important thing, especially after Katrina. I'm a civil engineer. I'm about the infrastructure. So why do we have to have Katrina? Why do we have to have blackouts? Why our infrastructure is failing us? So I started getting into resilience. Now, resilience is how to adapt under conditions of stress. So it could be recovering from the wildfire, recovering from the blackout, recovering from the earthquake, whatever it is. That's one way of adapting. But another way is it's not necessarily a disaster or an acute event, but it's like a chronic, slow moving. It could be something that requires a continuous process of adaptation. So I started studying what are called the near misses, the ones, me and my student at the time, we got sick of studying disasters. And we're like, what about the disasters that didn't happen? What are the positive case studies of successful adaptation? We got into the Oroville Dam, tallest earthen dam in the world at the time it was built. It's in California, and it damn near failed. There would have been 30 feet of water in Sacramento if the Oroville Dam had collapsed, but it didn't collapse. Why not? Well, all these positive case studies, the answer turned out to be human ingenuity, creativity, new ideas, and a willingness to change in the face of extreme circumstances. And I was like, well, isn't that interesting? The source, the ultimate source of all adaptive capacity is human ingenuity. So we started studying organizations and people. And this is at this time in my life where I'm doing, my Mike Cernovich showers, and I'm trying to figure out how am I going to survive divorce? How am I going to change as a human being? And I got really into psychological resilience. So you think about Maslow, probably the most well-known American psychologist ever, B.F. Skinner, who trains pigeons how to play ping pong, and then there's Maslow, who tries to help people get better. And Maslow it's either famous or notorious, depending upon your point of view, his hierarchy of human motivations. Down at the bottom, what do you got? Food, shelter, safety, security. This is where civil engineers work. I'll get you clean water. I'll get you a safe house to live in. Civil engineers, I've been down at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy like my whole career. Well, what comes above that? Let's say it's sense of belonging. Let's say it's self-esteem. And what did he put up at the top? He put self-actualization. Well, this gets interesting. I was asked by the Army Corps to do a talk on cyber and hybrid attacks. Like, not all of the disasters are what they call kinetic. They're not all working at the level of infrastructure. When you talk about cyber attacks, there's an infrastructure component. But when you talk about propaganda and misinformation, that's not working at this level of infrastructure. You want all the fiber optic cables and all the servers up so that your propaganda message can get out there, via Facebook or whatever, and reach the public. You're operating at this higher level. Maslow had sense of belonging and self-esteem. It turns out way down at the bottom, you got Freud. Freud's like, people are motivated by the pleasure principle. It's all food and sex and a good cigar, But then a little higher up, there's another Viennese psychologist, Adler. Adler's like, no, it's not. It's about power. People are motivated about power over other people. Maslow comes along and he says, look, all this is good. This stuff's got to get taken care of. Your social relationships, where you fit in society, the social hierarchy of life, all that pleasure principle stuff that Freud goes in. It's all good. But really up here, he goes, self-actualization. People want to become more of themselves, whatever that is. Well, Maslow wrote his hierarchy of human motivation in 1943. And guess who was rotten in a concentration camp in Nazi Germany in 1943? Another Viennese psychologist named Viktor Frankl. And when Viktor Frankl was liberated from the concentration camp, he recreated the book that he was working on when he was, whatever the word is, arrested, recreated that from memory, finished it, he published it, and it included later in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, memoirs of his time in the concentration camp. Frankl said, man can suffer any deprivation as long as he has a reason why. Frankl says, you don't need food, you don't need water, you don't need shelter, you don't need security, you don't need the sense of belonging and esteem and all that stuff, as long as you have a reason to persist, to endure all the hardships at the bottom of the pyramid. Now, for him, he's a religious man. He was persecuted. He watched his family be murdered for his religion. And he kept, according to his own account, the meaning of his life while he was in the concentration camp. And he credits that with getting him through, and now he's sharing it with the world. Freud is right. Pleasure motivates people. Adler is right. Power motivates people. Maslow is right. The sense of mastery, of having a purpose and becoming something larger, better. And Frankl changed my whole career. I don't want to be about clean water anymore. I want to be about meaning, because it is meaning that allows people to take whatever the stress is and turn it into creativity and ingenuity and become stronger. So I started with this phrase, self-actual engineering, because I was so into Maslow, and I haven't thought of a better one. The point is, I don't want to be the engineer that works at the bottom of the hierarchy anymore. I want to work at the top. How do I help you? How do I help other people become better versions of themselves so that they can pursue more meaningful lives? And this is going to hit you in September. Your child is going to be born, and whatever you thought your mission in life was is going to be rewritten, is going to be challenged. I'm hoping this for you, right? And you're going to have a new purpose. And some part of you might say, I need to be a better person so I can be a better father. I need to be a better person so I can be a better example. I need to be a better, whatever it is, because all of a sudden the consequences of who you are have just taken on brand new meaning. I need to get my shit together and resolve my stuff, because if I don't, I'm just going to wind up passing it on to my child. And that's not my child's job. Hey, kid, after you become verbal, could you maybe start working on my issues? That's not your kid's job. It is your job to get your shit in one bag. I mean, to be vulgar about it, I'm using this pop culture metaphor, to resolve your issues so that your child doesn't have to deal with them for you. Self-actual engineering is about helping people do that. So I got plenty of colleagues. There are other engineers out there who are going to keep your lights on, or, who are going to tell you how to make your drywall, or, whatever it is. Engineers do a lot of great stuff.
So where do you start, and what do you think is preventing a lot of people from dealing with their shit? I know it's a very tough question.
It's a really good question. The first thing is misconceptions and lies. That's where it starts. Twitter just locked me out again. I say wrong things. So they email me and they're so condescending. They're like, We understand in these difficult times that it's hard to sort out, what's right from wrong when you're talking about certain sensitive subjects. And so we're going to lock you out of your account for the next 12 hours while you think about it. Well, I've thought about it, and I've been watching birth rates decline. I've been watching miscarriages go up. And you're darn right, Twitter, I'm going to think more about it. And they're probably going to lock me out again. My girlfriend is suing them. She's part of this big lawsuit because the social media companies have been colluding and responding to the pressure of the federal government to violate First Amendment rights. And the lawsuit's probably going to go somewhere. But me, I'm just locked out for 12 hours. Maybe because I put a question mark at the end of the sentence or something. So I'm going to stick with something that's safe. Seed oils are a lie. Statins are a lie. Most of what you've been taught, what I was taught as a child, what my mother raised me on, were lies about diet, nutrition. The cholesterol hypothesis is a lie. There is no such thing as the Mediterranean diet. Like, what the hell? What did you think that was? Pizza and red wine? Like, the Mediterranean, in case you haven't noticed, is a whole freaking ocean surrounded by like people with different cultures and languages and religious beliefs and different geographies and a different diet. The Mediterranean diet is another lie. It is a propaganda that was perpetrated by people who bought off prestigious universities. So we have been raised with all these lies from the Department of Health and Human Services. And I'm just using this as an example. It was in my longevity talk. According to the metrics of the Department of Health and Human Services, according to their own measures, people are eating better and exercising more. So why did life expectancy go down before COVID? If we're doing a better job of eating our seed oils and getting the exercise that they tell us to get, doing our cardio and stuff like that, then why are we dying? We spend $7 billion a year on cancer research and even more on healthcare per capita than any other country. We spend more on healthcare per capita, like up here, all the other countries. Here's our military spending, and here's our healthcare spending, right? Relative to all other countries. Then why are we dying? Because their advice is a bunch of lies. So the first thing that holds people back from being a better version, closer approximation of their ideal self, are the misconceptions and the lies that they've been told. The harder you keep working on the thing, and you're like, oh, if I just seed oil harder, then I'm going to get healthier. When you see that you're working harder on something that keeps getting worse, that's your first sign that you harbor a serious misconception. Oh, if I had only worn 3 masks, then I wouldn't have tested positive for COVID. Next time I'll put on a 4th. The harder you work at something, the worse it gets. It's because you have a misconception about the way the world works. And most of these misconceptions happen because you've been lied to. It's the first thing you got to get out of the way. The second thing is even though you start working closer to the truth, you still got a lot of trauma to go through. Not all your behavior is voluntary. You're going to do things. And then, I don't know, someone's going to come along and say, why do you keep sabotaging yourself? If you just do this and you do, but it's not that freaking easy because we are biologically hardwired by our unresolved trauma to do something. Freud actually coined this term, but to repeat the trauma. It is a compulsion to repeat. And there's a good evolutionary reason for it. If you experience what's called a grizzly bear attack and you just barely live, wouldn't you spend like the next year of your life training against grizzly bear attacks? I mean, you'd be like, okay, I'm going to do this. And how do I do that? And of course you would. And then a year later, you'd be like, come on, grizzly, I'm ready for you now. You'd be fearless in front of because you resolved your trauma through rehearsal of the trauma. What happened here? What happened here? What happened? What could I have done differently? By rehearsing it and replaying it, reliving it, you prepare yourself to confront it with confidence the next time. We are biologically hardwired with the compulsion to repeat our traumas. So, how does this show up? If you experienced trauma in relation to a primary caregiver, your mother, Be classic example for a man. And it's unresolved. You're going to carry that into your relationships as an adult. And you're going to go around. I'm going to exaggerate a little bit. I'm going to dramatize. It's not really an exaggeration, but I'm going to dramatize. And you're going to go up to that next girl you have really great chemistry with, and you're going to be like, hey, would you mind if I replay episodes with my mother, but now I'm in control? And, when I get that right, then I'll let you know and everything. And thank you very much. It'll only take 3 or 4 years. She didn't sign up for that because she's got her own issues with her dad. And she's like, yes, I understand what you're doing. But in the meantime, my dad left me. And so I've been seeking a man that's just like my dad, who's emotionally unavailable so that he'll leave me too. And then they'll give me a chance to convince him to actually stay. And when I figured all that out, then my trauma will be resolved. Then I probably won't need the guy anymore. But if you wouldn't mind playing that role, and we go through this in our primary, and we call it relationship chemistry. I don't know, we fit so good, we sure do, because your trauma is speaking to mine. You can ask me how I know, James. So I've done a lot of self-examination. So the first thing is you got to get the lies out of the way. And the second thing is, now that you're confronted with the truth, which hurts, the truth is actually going to be in here. Why do you do the things you do? It's not because you're stupid. It's not because you're irrational. It's because you have an unmet emotional need. And it's a real need. You can't bury it. I learned this from my wife's alcoholism and everything that I read about codependence and alcoholism, addiction. I'm going to be even more broad. Addiction is not the problem. Addiction is the addict's search for a solution. If they weren't in pain, they wouldn't be using. And I'm like, holy crap. So when I was thinking that her drinking was the problem, what I really had to think about was, why did I marry an alcoholic? Yeah, her drinking is not the problem. Her drinking was my solution. I got to figure out why some part of me thought, she's perfect. Mm-hmm. I got that. That was Al-Anon. I only went to Al-Anon like 3 times. But she's in a program. I'm like, I'm married to her. I got to go to Al-Anon. And there were 3 very profound times. First time I walk in there, and it doesn't really work the way mixed groups work. I went to a men's group, and that was it, just men. When the women are there, people are like nicer to one another, more polite. They don't challenge you. But I guess I'm full of piss and vinegar anyway. So listen to my story. And then one of the guys goes, well, you're an asshole. Whoa, why am I? I'm not the one drinking. Your wife has been drinking since she was how old? And I go, maybe 17. And they go, she's a brain damaged drunk. And you're treating her like she's some kind of adult human being capable of making her own decisions. You're an asshole. And I walked out of Al-Anon and I was like, holy shit, I've got a brain damaged wife. And I asked her, well, what do you want, hon? Well, what do you think is good for you? Well, what are your needs? First of all, she's developmentally stalled at the age when she started drinking. That made sense to me. But second of all, her brain doesn't work because it's been damaged by years of drinking. And she's got to be sober for like six months, get some supplements, do something to get her brain online before a cogent thought is going to come up. So that was like, that was big. So then I go back to Al-Anon months later because I have to space these events out, and they go, well, you got to figure out what you're getting out of her drinking. Well, what do you mean? I'm not getting anything out of her drinking. No, I hate her drinking. But you got to figure out why you picked her and why drinking works for you. God damn, Al-Anon. So this is the truth phase, right? I was harboring misconceptions. And the misconceptions were that it was her problem, that I didn't have anything, that I wasn't creating it, I wasn't causing it, I wasn't getting anything out of it. And the misconceptions were revealed. Now comes the really difficult, or the truth was revealed, the misconceptions were cast away. Now comes the really difficult thing about, what was I getting out of it? Sex. Okay, now I got to figure that out. I got to figure out how to resolve my compulsions, my obsessions, my behavior, which has real needs behind it, without making my wife do something, without having to count on her doing it for me. God damn, James, that was really hard. That was all before ice baths. When ice baths came along, it was practice for doing the really difficult thing. Like, I know I can do this. I just did 6 minutes in freezing cold water. This is nothing, Now I can walk into Al-Anon and they can tell me I'm an asshole. It's like, I kind of suspect it, and it'll be okay. So the first thing, the misconceptions have got to go, and that's hard. The second thing, once the misconceptions are out of the way, now you got to confront what your real needs are, what your unresolved trauma is, and what's really driving your behavior without trying to bury it, deny it, blame it on other people. That's really hard too.
I love how honest you were, man. And we're mirrors. So if you want to go into like the law of attraction or whatever, it's like, well, you're seeing a reflection of yourself in the people that you're surrounding yourself with. So I think one of the hardest things that people may not be willing to do is literally take a look in the mirror. Take a look in the mirror before you actually walk out into this world, because whatever you're internalizing is going to show up externally. Fascinating. So
one of the things that they teach you in AA is to take a look around at your group, find the people that you have some admiration for. You don't have to admire everything about them, but there's something about them that you admire and say, I want some of that. I want some of that. I want some of that. We need models. We don't learn through homework assignments. Maybe 20% we learn through homework assignments in the classroom and stuff like that. What we learn is by watching models, imitating them, interacting with them, seeing what they do, trying it on for ourselves. So that's the approach now that I take to my science and to biohacking. People need models. So I'm not giving medical advice. I'm not teaching people what to do. But if you were to say, well, Tom, what worked for you? Oh, this is what I did. I do my exercise after my ice bath. And then I went to the lab and they told me my testosterone went through the roof. There's an experiment you could run to see if it works for you. There's no guarantee because everybody's different and it's not a prescription. I am an example. And people can say, well, I want some of that. Or they might look at me and say, what is he doing running a wellness company? That guy, last time he reported his body fat, it was 24%. Screw that. I'm going to go follow some guy who's at 8% and looks great on Instagram. Because, well, okay, maybe that's not what you admire about me. Maybe you're like, I want some of this, but not that. That's okay. Then you can go over and you can watch what Ben Greenfield does, eat like him, exercise like him, and be ripped, like Ben. And it's not going to hurt my feelings. I watch what he does and I start thinking, maybe some of that curcumin, I don't even know what it is, like I'll figure it out. I'm happy I don't weigh 249. I've kept that part off. So if I'm reminding myself I'm in a competition with me, so far I'm doing great. It doesn't stop me from watching other people and saying, I'd like some of that. I'd like to learn from that guy. I wonder what he's doing, those kinds of things.
Yeah. So last question that I kind of want to ask, especially since you just...
It's only been like 6 hours. So
I know. I'll chop it up and I'll make it seem cohesive somehow.
Yeah.
And maybe a personal question, but I know that when I was dealing with a lot of my shit and realizing at a certain point that I was using alcohol and I was an asshole and creating a lot of problems in my life, what helped me out was psilocybin. So do you believe that there is a way that we can kind of get to this clean slate where everyone, I'm just throwing it out there, where everyone has completely resolved all of their trauma, and what would that even look like?
I get that question. Yeah, because I talk a lot about trauma. Sorry, go ahead.
I'll say without the necessity for plant medicine. Can we do that naturally? What would that take?
Yeah, Ben Greenfield has decided, I think, if I'm remembering his post correctly, that he's off all of the neurological modifiers. Like he's just, I don't know. He has a list and I don't remember what's on it, but he's not doing it anymore. And I'm not going to tell Ben Greenfield what to do or what not to do. At the time that he thought that there was some value. But I've noticed that people go back. When you're doing your 7th ayahuasca, I have questions. Like, if it's a life-changing experience, how many lives are you living? I've never done it. I'm, maybe this much experience with half a mushroom. Like, so I go places in my imagination without, maybe I'm just afraid of the psychotropics. I read Michael Pollan's book, but that didn't stoke my curiosity. So I'm not speaking from personal experience. I'm speaking more from questions. If you're able to use psychedelics, psychotropics, and we believe the reports that people have of going deep into their journey, confronting in their imagination the traumas, however they embodied or however they appear to them, and feeling that resolution. I'm not going to argue with that because that sounds like a wonderful experience. The question is, what happens when they re-enter the world? Because if they're back in their old relationships, their old job, their old environment, the question is it possible that they've wiped a lot of the slate clean and that they re-enter an environment that replaces, like the old grooves, get relayed by familiar experiences, and they may be overconfident when they re-enter. They're like, oh, I should totally call my mother now. It'll be fine. And I don't know why I'm picking on moms, but you get the point. Like, we can go back to some of those events that will lay down the same ruts that we went into the refreshing experience with. I don't know. I haven't read the literature. So I'm saying these are questions. Is there a program for reentry? If it's a life-changing experience, what have you changed in your life? Maybe that's a challenge. Maybe this is because I'm still an asshole. Nonetheless, people are going down to Costa Rica or wherever they go, and they're having, sometimes it's very expensive, or sometimes they're just going up to Burning Man or going on their own journey, and it's inexpensive, but they're looking for something. And some of the people who are looking for things aren't finding what they tell me that they're looking for. So I want to know if it's really there. And other people, Ben might be having this experience, got something out of it. He says, now I'm done.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. I take a different route. Do you ever lucid dream?
I've had maybe like one instance of it. I used to get like sleep paralysis a lot for like months on end. It was wild.
Yeah.
But no, I've never actually practiced myself.
The way the experiences, Jason and Adrian have had them, but the way the experiences of ayahuasca and other psychedelics are related to me reminds me of a lucid dream. I used to have a recurring nightmare when I was a kid, and I didn't know what lucid dreaming was. I must have been 8 or something, but I learned how to control the dream so it wasn't so scary. And I've been doing it for decades until I found out that like lucid dreaming is a thing. And then I'm like, oh, that's what I've been doing, where I will replay sections of the dream and get to different outcomes. I will steer the dream, or sometimes the dream will just be too fucking scary and I'll shut the whole thing down. And then, so I came out of this experience at Arco Sante. It was a lucid dreaming workshop where it was explained to me. And I said, well, I want to lucid live. Like, how do I bring that level of imagination and orientation and play to my life, So that's a big transition. So when I say I do it different, what I know works for me is writing and play. Now, sometimes dreaming, but I will go over things in my imagination so many different ways. And then I will use words to give my body the experience. My heart doesn't know if it's all coming out of my imagination or if it, reached my heart through some other sensory experience. And we know this from just going to the movies. You go to the scary movie, you're like, whoa, look, buddy, you're in a theater. That's not a real knife. That's not a real hockey mask. And you know this, but you give yourself up to the vicarious, emotional thrill. Your adrenal gland don't know. Some part of your brain knows, but the rest of your body is like, don't go in there, And so when you identify with a character in a story, your body has the experience of the character. Well, that's what I do. So I do all this writing. You can read some of my old articles on Medium, and I just put one up on my Substack that included what happened to me when I watched The Wizard of Oz for the first time. And you got to go way to your Wayback Machine. Black and white TV, that thing was like a piece of freaking furniture with like wood carvings and stuff like that. And used to come on once a year. And my parents thought this was a great movie because it is a great movie. And the once a year would come on, they sat us down. And I guess I was finally old enough to watch The Wizard of Oz, and it scared the shit out of me. And I didn't realize that my recurring nightmare was Dorothy in the castle when the Wicked Witch says, and it's not long, my pretty. And she turns the hourglass upside down. She says, this is how long you have to live. And the sand is going through the hourglass. It's red sand. I remember the movie as being red. But when I watched it as a kid, it was in black and white. And the recurring dream I had for years was just a thin black line. And the line was always moving. I didn't know when I was a child it was sand, and I didn't recognize it as the hourglass. It was just a thin black line. And I would be in my dream and scared as hell, and I wouldn't go get my parents or something. And I would go back to sleep, and I'd say, I'm going to fuck with the line. I'm going to shake it up. As long as I can keep it moving, I'm going to be okay. I got to wait until I'm 53 freaking years old and in a hotel in California suffering from travel and social anxiety because I got to give a talk to the Navy the next day, and I'm in like some kind of panic mode. And I said, brain, I'm sick of this shit. You're going to figure this out. You're going to figure out, why do you have such anxiety? Why, when you wake up in the morning, I want a solution to this problem because I'm a professor and I'm giving my brain the homework. And I went through the old dream, and I finally connected it to the Wizard of Oz and to the hourglass. And then it wasn't so scary anymore. I went back and I watched the movie, and I thought about Dorothy, and I thought about Toto, and I thought how the dream is really, it's not about death at the hands of the witch. Dorothy was an orphan, and Toto was like her surrogate child. Her parents, when Miss Gulch comes over, her uncle, he's such a fucking wimp. He's like, oh, we can't go against the law, and then he disappears. And Auntie M, she's got nothing. She's like, we've got to give the dog away to be destroyed, Dorothy. I'm sorry. Fuck that. Get the shotgun. Make them take that dog away. What the hell? And where's, the hired help? They're just going to like give the dog to Miss Gulch and say, sorry, Dorothy, you already lost your parents. We know this dog means everything to you, and there's nothing we can do. Fuck you. It's the abandonment. She has no parents. And now the people around who are supposed to protect her can't even keep her dog safe. No wonder she wants to go to Oz. No wonder she runs away. What's waiting for her at the fucking farm? A bunch of people who can't do a damn thing for her. So, I wake up, I got to give my lecture to the Navy, and I'm like getting worked up about Dorothy. What does she find in Oz? She finds friends who would risk their lives to save her. You're home, but she's not. She's still in the land of make-believe. Okay, Fred Rogers says the land of make-believe. She's still, guess what? It's revealed at the end. It's a dream. She's reliving the trauma in a dream. And at the end of the movie, she had the power to go home. in herself the whole time, right? And I'm like, God damn, Tom, if you'd figured this one out 45 years ago, it might have saved you a lot of grief. James, I was just the beginning. I'm going to tell you this last vignette. I read a book. I just finished it like Friday. It's called It Didn't Start With You. It is about the inheritance of unresolved trauma. And again, there's some really good science on this in animals and humans. In the animal study, if you take a rat and you expose it to an unfamiliar odor and give an electric shock at the same time, it will learn to be afraid of the odor. This is a classic B.F. Skinner conditioning, right? So scientists did that. They scared the shit out of the rats with the odor to train the rats to be afraid of the odor. You know, cherry blossoms or something. I don't know. It sounds delightful in a candle, but the rats are scared of it. And then they put the rats back in a normal environment. They allow the rats to breed. The rats have pups. They raise the pups out, never exposed to electric shocks, never exposed to the odor. And then they take the pups apart after they're full grown and they expose them to the odor. What do the pups do? They freak the frick out. They have the exact same reaction that their parents had. The pups inherited the unresolved trauma, these rat pups, from their parents in the epigenetic coding of their DNA. In other words, the unresolved trauma methylated. There's other mechanisms of methylation is the biggest one. It changed the gene expression in the rats so that their offspring would not have to be taught behaviorally, oh, stay away from that odor. It just became a genetic expression. Rats can inherit through this epigenetic transfer unresolved trauma from their parents, and it can persist for 7 generations. Okay, we share 99% of our DNA with rats. Sometimes the 1% that's different is really freaking important. Like, we're not rats, but there's so much in common that it leads to hypotheses, right? So they went and looked at Holocaust survivors with PTSD, Holocaust survivors without PTSD. And then, of course, they looked at their children. And then, of course, they found separated twins, same genetics, different nurturing environments. Well, goddamn if they didn't find evidence of epigenetic transfer in human beings of unresolved trauma from parents down to right now we have grandchildren. What this means is no amount of talk therapy, childhood examination of your relationship with your mother, navel gazing, whatever, could necessarily find the trauma that you're carrying with you because you inherited from a grandparent. Wow. But in this book, Mark Wolin wrote it. It didn't start with you. He describes case study after case study after case study of people who experienced a revelation. That is, they were raised in lies or misconceptions, and until the trauma of their parents or their grandparents was explained to them, they didn't understand their own compulsions. They didn't understand their own, it's hard to summarize the cases, but there was one Cambodian American boy, born in America, never known hard times, but he gets to be 6 or 7 years old, and he starts acting out this murderous play. He's got like a coat hanger, and he's stabbing the couch cushions, and he's like, kill, kill, kill. And then he runs into a wall and gives himself another concussion. And the parents, who are Cambodian immigrants in the United States, they finally take him to Mark Wolin. Mark says, Cambodian, when did you come over? And they're like, well, early 70s. I say, well, it was a tough time in Cambodia, or maybe it was mid 70s, something like that. And they go, yeah, we don't talk about it. We've never told our son about it, but we escaped the killing fields. My father was murdered for, being accused of being some kind of CIA sympathizer. Really? How did they kill him? They beat in his head. Huh. And then, so they described the experiences that they've never talked about. And Mark says, you need to talk about this with your son. You need to describe there's only so much you can say to a 7-year-old, but you need to describe your grandfather. You need to describe why he's not here with him in the US. You need to try and describe what death is. And you need to say, put a picture of his grandfather over his bed and say, your grandfather loves you and blesses you. 6 weeks later, they did like some kind of Buddhist ceremony at the pagoda. They hung the picture. They did the ritual. The boy gave the mother back his plate coat hanger. He said, I don't need this anymore. He stopped running his head into walls. No more concussions. There's no developmental, like classical conditioning explanation for this that's better than inherited epigenetic trauma. All right, so that's that book, and I finished it. And Wallen says in the book, well, what you got to do is you got to do your genealogy, get your family tree together and, explore what the traumas were in your family tree and talk to you. I'm 56 years old. My father's dead. My mother has Alzheimer's. She doesn't even recognize me. Where am I going to go and get this information? Ancestry.com. Because they've posted a gravestone of my great grandfather. I'm named for my grandfather. His name was Thomas Payson, no middle name. I have two older cousins, male cousins, but my mother said to her siblings, I want to be the one to name my son after dad. If you would, please give me the name Thomas so that, my son and your sons don't have the same name. So my oldest male cousin is Andy. My second oldest male cousin is Albion. And my mother got her wish and named me for her father. His gravestone is up on ancestor.com. And so is his father's. Richard Conant Payson died when he was 47 years old. My grandfather was 8. If your father died 2 months before World War I, before the US got into World War I, 2 months before the Lusitania, you're 8 years old and your father dies, and now it's just you, your 3 older siblings, and your mom. Would you be traumatized? Probably. I mean, mom didn't take you down to the best, pediatric psychologist in the state of Southern Maine to have you work through your shit. That stuff didn't exist. What would your trauma be? Would it be maybe fear of abandonment? Well, fuck yeah. And if you were, little 3-year-old Tommy watching a movie, which is a classic, about an orphan who's unprotected in this world, who works out her fear of abandonment in, her imaginary land of Oz, would that maybe give you fucking nightmares if you were carrying your grandfather's epigenetic trauma? And James, I just put this all together yesterday, put it in this huge, long, frickin' 29-minute read, which no one is ever going to spend 20, because that's not the way the internet works, but someday maybe it'll be part of a book. And I'm like, that makes sense. So what do I do? First, I've removed the misconceptions. This lifelong fear of abandonment. And why did I marry an alcoholic? Because she can't live without me. What's she going to do? She's going to go get an apartment, see how that works out. She can't go anywhere. I'm so freaking clever. Look at me, what I did, And then what did I do to my girlfriend? It's just one constant, she's got her issues, right? But my thing, one constant loyalty test after another. She never could have passed these loyalty tests, because if she did, I'd come at her with another one. Because what am I working on? I'm working on my grandfather's fear of abandonment. What am I going to do about it? I'm going to rip a page out of that, like, Cambodian kid, and hang up a picture of my granddad. Say, I'm there for you. Like, I don't know what else to say. I'm not sure. Like, I'm going to try and recreate the experience that Wolin relates. First, you become aware. That's the misconception. Then, in your imagination, relive the trauma and fix it. Like, resolve it from a position of control that says, you're in charge of this. This is what it is now. And it doesn't have to be like that anymore. So I'm gonna create a ritual like that. I'll probably invite my girlfriend in, to do this with me, see how it goes. She'll probably think I'm crazy. And I'm like, I'm the guy who does 4-minute ice baths. You already knew I was crazy, right? And we'll see how that goes.
Fascinating, man.
A lot of stuff in there.
Article. We got a lot.
I can send you a link. Yeah. I mean, it's easy. SeagarTP.substack.com.
Okay. Is that that's your main blog?
That's my personal blog. MorozkoForge.com, slash. I mean, there's a lot of stuff there. But you go to our journal online, you read all about cold exposure and cancer and testosterone and pregnancy. And there's a lot of good stuff in there. But there's some things that they're not about ice baths or cold exposure or even biohacking. It's what's going on in here and in here. And it kind of sucks. When, I've written about my daughter and I'm like, yeah, it sucks to have a dad who's a writer. She's got a great sense of humor about it. So it's not a big deal, but if you want to see her, experiences with Krav or whatever, I've written about that stuff. So putting it out there because there might be somebody else in a similar situation. And maybe they read that and they say, just like I read Mark Wallen's book and I'm like, okay, there's something in there for me. They might read that and they say, I think there's something in there for me. And this is partly why I'm so curious about going to the forge, shivering, and then having the imaginary conversation with my grandfather. If I could take care of him when he was 8 years old, I would do that. If I could take care of myself when I was 8 years old, I would do that. If I could have taken care of my mother, I would have done that. I can't do any of those things because there is no 8.21 gigawatt like DeLorean that is going to go back to the future and allow you to save your parents. But part of the reason that we made 3 movies about that is because it's such a popular, there's a biological tug for the child to go back in time and save their parents. On the surface, it's a ridiculous freaking movie. This high school kid played by a 35-year-old Michael J. Fox, whose best friend is a lunatic nuclear scientist. And they're going to invent a time machine so that he can go back and go on a date with his mom. Like the whole thing makes no sense, except as the fantasy, the common childhood fantasy, you're going to save your parents and fix your family. So I'm susceptible to that fantasy, but I have to write my own screenplay and say, okay, granddad, what did you need that you didn't get? I want you to have it. And see if that were, and then I talk to myself too. Hey, little Tommy, this was never your problem. This was never your burden. This was never for you to carry. And you don't have to. Like Dr. Seagar's here, not going anywhere. You will never be abandoned like Dorothy was. Bring that tornado on. We'll do it together.
It's all subconscious stuff. It's
correct.
Why do you act the way that you act? Why do you behave?
Yep.
I've seen that with like candy cravings or whatever that I was addicted to in the past, and then it's like I'll go back and I'll see, all right, why do I like this specific thing so much? Like, okay, because it was giving me joy because I would get this candy after winning a baseball game, something like that. But
makes sense.
It goes back way beyond.
Yep.
What we were even conscious for, just passing along consciousness.
You didn't even exist. Yeah. I wasn't even, a glint in my father's eye when my grandfather was traumatized. So, I'm working on it.
That's all you can do.
Right.
At least you're willing to work on it. You're a step ahead.
And man, have I got a story for my kids.
Oh yeah.
Hey, sit down.
Well, Tom, I want to thank you so much for your time, brother.
You're welcome. Thanks for listening to all my stuff.
No, fantastic info, man. I felt like I was talking to a friend. That was awesome.
You were.
Thank you, man.
It's been a pleasure talking with you.
You too, brother. We'll stay in touch.
Thank you, James.